Hi there, and welcome to Power Play on this Tuesday. I'm Vashi Kapelos in Ottawa. Tonight, King Charles in the speech from the throne.
True north is indeed strong and free.
The King delivers the throne speech to open the 45th session of Parliament. It's only the third time Canada's monarch has read the speech themselves. The last time, more than 48 years ago. We've got full coverage of this historic day, starting with former Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Kim Campbell. Then, the impact of the King's visit, plus a debate on the substance of the throne speech with our front bench. Brian Gallant, James Moore, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie will be here. Plus a very special conversation with Her Majesty the Queen's wreath bearer, Silver Cross recipient, and Royal Canadian Army Cadet Warrant Officer Olivia Vernelli, whose father paid the ultimate sacrifice in service of this country in Afghanistan. Our conversation with her is coming up a little bit later on in our program. First, though,
I've always had the greatest admiration for Canada's unique identity, which is recognized across the world for bravery and sacrifice in defense of national values and for the diversity and kindness of Canadians. Many Canadians are feeling anxious and worried about the drastically changing world around them. Fundamental change is always unsettling. Yet this moment is also an incredible opportunity, an opportunity for renewal, an opportunity to think big and to act bigger, an opportunity for Canada to embark on the largest transformation of its economy since the Second World War.
highlights there from an historic day here in our nation's capital. King Charles III delivering the speech from the throne. His first visit to this country as sovereign, his 20th, though, as a part of the monarchy. Crowds gathered just blocks from where we sit tonight for moments with the monarch, and Canadian politicians and dignitaries packed that room you're looking at, the Senate building, to hear the King's speech. Among them, take a look right there, former Prime Ministers Justin Trudeau, Stephen Harper, and Kim Campbell. Notably absent was former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. We have some breaking news from his office this hour. A spokesperson confirming to us that the former Prime Minister yesterday was admitted to the Ottawa Civic Hospital after feeling unwell. He has since been transferred to the Ottawa Heart Institute, where he received a stent. Mr. Chrétien, the spokesperson went on to say, is recovering well and is expected to return home very soon to pursue his normal activities. So the news there that former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, who had been expected to attend the ceremony today, the speech from the throne today, was feeling unwell yesterday, ended up getting a stent, a procedure, a heart procedure here in Ottawa, and is said to be, according to his spokesperson, recovering well. We certainly do wish him the best, and we'll keep you apprised of his condition and anything else we get from his office throughout the evening. Just after that speech from the throne, I spoke with one former Prime Minister who was in attendance there, Kim Campbell, at the National War Memorial. The Right Honourable, Kim Campbell is former Prime Minister of Canada. She's with me now. Ms. Campbell, it's such a pleasure to see you. Thank you for making the time.
It was fun, yeah.
How was it to be inside that room? Describe for those of us who didn't get to be on the inside what it was like.
Well, you know, it was delightful. The new Senate chamber is not as sort of august as the old traditional one with all of its paneling and stuff, but they've done a very good job of creating a place that the Senate can operate while the old building is being renovated. But it was, so it didn't have this sort of sense of feeling very old and traditional, but it felt very, I mean, the whole ceremony was very dignified, but it was like a party. And it was full of people, you know, who hadn't seen each other for a long time. And all the senators, you know, former senators, former ministers and members and lieutenant governors and all sorts of people. It was just really delightful, and people were just happy to be there. It was a very good feeling, and so it was like a big party. I said to the senators, you guys throw a great party.
Maybe something they've never heard before.
Yeah.
What do you think was the common purpose that brought everyone in that room together today?
I'm sorry, we've got some nice person wheeling over there, but this is Ottawa, people have to work. I think, first of all, the people recognize that it was a historic event. I mean, we have opening of Parliament every time we have a new Parliament, and it's always a very nice occasion. But with King Charles here, I mean, we haven't had the monarch here for, since 1977. And of course, the fact that he's our new king, but also that he hasn't been well. I think people really valued the fact that he would come and do this. And I think from Prime Minister Carney's point of view, because it's really his speech that he gets to write, it was a wonderful opportunity just to demonstrate a little bit that, Canada is not America, that Canada has a very distinct identity. And in fact, even with the monarchy, it works because we've Canadianized it, that the functions are performed by distinguished Canadians as governors general, lieutenant governors, and we alternate them every 5 years, and they come from all different walks of life in Canada. They reflect our diversity. So the monarchical institution has become a Canadian way of celebrating all the many peoples who make up Canada. And people do these jobs, and there's a lot of demand on the lieutenant governors in the provinces and on the governor general. And they're the people who show that the ceremonial and kind of sparkly, patriotic side of our national identity can be led by somebody who then doesn't use it to press our political buttons, that is separate from power. And there's something very healthy about that we can, honestly admire and celebrate who we are, but that we can still yell at our politicians and hold them to account in a very special way. So it's a remarkable institution because our head of state is not the head of government. The two things are separate. And so I think today, the fact that the king was there as a reminder of the origins of the institution, and the fact that he, is our new king, and as I say, that people are concerned about himself, it just was very nice. It was a very friendly feeling. As I said, a lot of sort of un-American activities going on.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that because in the lead up to the king's delivery of the speech and his visit more largely, so much of what people were talking about was what would the message be to the United States. What do you think the message to Canadians today was?
Well, I think the message to Canadians is we have an old and respected identity. And we are an interesting country, and we have a French population. We have Indigenous people. We are a very interesting, diverse accumulation of communities and peoples that has made this very successful country. And the way we deal with it is very different from, for example, the way Americans do. And that we respect those differences, we celebrate them. The fact that everything was done in two languages, the fact that we had an Indigenous person who made a cultural presentation, the fact that our First Nations people were there in their magnificent headdresses and regalias and clothes. I mean, they're just absolutely beautiful. This is not something that you find, for example, in the United States or in many other countries. So it's an interesting reminder of what goes in to make the Canadian community, which sometimes means there's lots of conflict. It doesn't mean that we're all, singing Kumbaya all the time. And it's a challenge and makes it maybe more difficult to govern, but it makes it us. And I think today people were of a mood to celebrate it, and the throne speech recognized that. But what I thought was also interesting, and remember that King Charles has been here many times as Prince Charles and made lots of speeches that were his own. This was the government speech, and that's what the throne speech is. But it opened with a comment about the Prime Minister working with the President of the United States on issues relating to our economic relations and our security relations. And what that really said too is, irrespective of all the other things that are happening, the government recognizes that it has a job to do. And the United States is a very important neighbor and partner, and the government is committed to working with the American government on the issues related to our economy and our security. Now, how successful those relations will be, we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what the Americans are going to do. But it is the intention, we're grown-ups. It's the intention of our government to continue to do what it always does, which is to interact responsibly and intelligently and in a friendly way with our neighbor. And that was the first thing that was kind of said of the speech, of the priority of the government. And I think that was important. So it said, for all the other things, talking about the things that define us differently, at the end of the day, we're lovers, not fighters here. Canada's not looking for a fight. You rile us, we'll strike back. You disrespect us, the Canadians will act of their own accord to support their own products and to do those things. You can't stop them from doing that, and nor should you. But we're not a cantankerous country with respect to the rest of the world, unless we are treated disrespectfully.
I do want to ask you about the moment that we find ourselves in and the unique nature of this threat, I guess you can call it, both on sovereignty, as it were, before the election in particular, but also the nature of the economic punishment at the moment through tariffs and the threat of even more, even additional ones. You're one of the few people who have led this country. What has been going through your mind as you watch all of that evolve?
Well, what's been going through my mind is what we're seeing out of the United States is unprecedented. A president, I think, abusing presidential power, and in such a way that the courts can barely keep up with the challenges to it, and that Congress has, I think, very irresponsibly delegated to the president tariff power at a time when it isn't a national emergency. So, in previous times, the Congress was much more powerful, much more defensive of its prerogatives. We've seen that this bill the president has may not pass the Senate. So maybe we're getting some, vertebrae stiffening in some people. I mean, I don't know, but it's very concerning and very difficult to know how to act. And then the president came out and said he was going to have all these tariffs on Europe, and then he came out and said, well, no, I'm not. And all of that is extremely difficult, aside from the fact that it plays havoc with the markets, and you sort of wonder who is benefiting by those ups and downs. So, we're in uncharted territory here in many ways, and we have to be prepared to be nimble. But I think the important thing is that we have no control over what's happening in the United States, and what's happening there is unprecedented. And all we can hope is that cooler, saner heads will prevail.
Different political leaders during the campaign from all the different parties converged upon a point in response to what you just laid out that was, in essence, we can't control what's happening there, but we are in a moment where we can now take control of our own destiny.
Yeah.
Do you think that is the sort of what we are presented with right now?
Well, when President Kennedy said, geography has made us neighbors, history has made us friends, etc. Canadian governments have for many decades tried to diversify our trade away from the American market. And it's very difficult because the proximity and the size of the American market makes it just a magnet for activity. And that is why I think we've had these interprovincial trade barriers, because there were a lot of provinces where the North-South relationship economically was more important than the East-West one. So changing the Canadian trade patterns has been very difficult, and there have been people who wanted to do more to Europe or more to Britain or whatever, very difficult. But I think now we're seeing very significant reasons that we need to do that. And that's why the interprovincial trade barriers, which were mentioned in the throne speech, are such an important issue to address, because they've actually reinforced the North-South orientation of our trade. So we will never, I think, be able to orient our economic activity away from the United States. But we can try to shift the balance. And Europe is now, of course, a much different partner than it was even, say, in the 1950s when John Diefenbaker wanted to have more trade with Britain, because Europe has grown into an economic powerhouse. And for strategic reasons as well, Europe is very interested in better relations with Canada. We also have, relationships with Asia. So I think that it is important for us to do as much as we can to diversify our trade, recognizing that the dominance of the United States isn't really because people were lackadaisical or didn't care. It's because, trade goes where the markets are and where economic rationality is. So it's a hard thing to shift, but sometimes there are reasons. For example, the desire of Canadians not to travel to the United States, the desire of Canadians not to purchase American products. That's not a government policy. And so, to the extent that Canadians themselves can reboot the balance of our markets, we might find that we are able to make some changes that previous governments found very difficult to make.
I will leave it on that note. Ms. Campbell, such a pleasure. Thank you for taking some time for this. Yeah. Thank you very much.
And it was fun.
Which is not a bad thing.
No.
The Right Honourable Kim Campbell. That is former Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Kim Campbell, right after the throne speech. Boy, do we have a lot to unpack, not only with the speech itself and the substance of it, but the broader diplomatic significance of the King's visit. We're going to do so with our front bench after a short break. Brian Gallant, James Moore, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie will join me. There they are in just 2 minutes.
It has been nearly 70 years since the Sovereign first opened Parliament. In the time since, Canada has dramatically changed, repatriating its constitution, achieving full independence, and witnessing immense growth. Canada has embraced its British, French, and Indigenous roots and become a bold, ambitious, innovative country that is bilingual, truly multicultural, and committed to reconciliation.
A clear overarching theme of today's speech from the throne and anticipation that preceded it, King Charles III expressing there the power of Canadian identity in the wake, of course, of Donald Trump's threats to our economy and sovereignty. Here to unpack the power of that pulpit at this specific moment in time is our front bench. With me tonight, former New Brunswick Liberal Premier Brian Gallant. He's now the CEO of Space Canada. Former Conservative Industry Minister James Moore. He's a senior advisor with Edelman. CTV News political analyst and former NDP leader Tom Mulcair is here, as is the Toronto Star's Queen's Park Bureau Chief Rob Benzie. Hi, everybody. Very nice to see you tonight on a pretty historic day. James, I know you weren't just Industry Minister. You were also, I remember many years at least a period of time that you were Heritage Minister. What did you think of the significance of the monarch delivering today's throne speech?
A historic moment, and there was an interesting choice that was made in terms of how the presentation happened. Normally, when throne speeches happen, the Governor General is sort of marched in as there's a procession into the Senate chambers, and then to deliver the speech from the throne. But there was an interesting choice that was made to have His Majesty in the room and to have the Prime Ministers of Canada, including Mr. Carney, Mr. Harper, Mr. Trudeau, mingling around. And so the visuals that came out of the room were an interesting choice, and I think a very impactful one, because you saw the Sovereign, and you saw our Prime Ministers, you saw members of Parliament, justices of the Supreme Court, members of the Senate, members of the public who are also in the room, sort of commingling one another in a cross-partisan, sort of almost like an informal way before the formalities started. It showed a unity. It showed a togetherness and a cooperation of spirit of the moment, where Canada feels under threat, rallying around our king, rallying around our government, and a throne speech that was presented in a way that's different than others in the past. So I think in terms of the presentation and the physical images and the physical moment, I think it was an interesting choice, a wise choice, and I think a very impactful one.
Tom, as James was kind of describing that, I was thinking how last night, ahead of our special coverage this morning, I was a bit cynical, to be honest, thinking, oh boy, is this really going to be all that it's touted to be? I have to say, in the moment, being there, the visuals were something. It's not just the visuals of the king himself, but the crowds, the sheer volume, the number of Canadians that came holding their flags, and exactly what James just pointed out, watching, former Prime Minister Stephen Harper and Justin Trudeau, for example, laughing with each other and talking back and forth. There is a symbol or a significance to it, I think, that I don't even know I could have anticipated would have been the case just 24 hours ago.
I couldn't agree more. And when it's the king who comes, they can actually order up 24 hours of sunshine, which is something that we haven't seen in the wider Ottawa area in the past month. The images today were just resplendent. It was phenomenal pictures. And it does remind us, Vashi, that we are a strong, stable, prosperous constitutional monarchy. And you know what? Yes, I mean, we can all joke about the tricorn hats and the usher with the black rod and the carriage and everything else. But the constitutional monarchies of this world, start with Sweden or go through, Belgium or Netherlands or Great Britain or Canada or Australia. They do kind of well when you look at the ladder of countries that have stability and peace, order, and good government. And I think that that's something we take for granted, and we shouldn't. Yes, a big discussion can take place, but I think about 30% of Canadians really find the monarchy important. So I don't know which political party is planning to form government by promising to get rid of it. So we'll continue to make the best use. And today, Carney made the best possible use. He had the king himself deliver the keynotes, and we'll discuss those details later on. But I thought overall, tremendous result and great work by Carney securing the presence of the monarch himself.
Yeah, sometimes, Rob, tradition can help inform our identity, and it definitely seemed like that was on full display today.
Yeah, I mean, this was a soft power flex for Canada, and I think and the audience of one at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue is perhaps the most important audience. Not that Canadians should feel bad about feeling so good about their country today. I think they should be, but I think it's important that President Trump sees that Canada is a unified and united country. And I thought that I agree with you, Vashi, that the pictures of Prime Ministers Trudeau and Harper and Campbell speaking together from different parties showed that there is something more important than partisan politics, that there is a country, a sovereign country that cares deeply about its history and is proud of where it's at. We beat ourselves up a lot in this country, and we've seen some ups and downs over the last few years. And I think these extraordinary times demand moments like today. And I think we should all feel pretty good about being Canadian this afternoon.
That greater context, Brian, of the extraordinary time we find ourselves in is, of course, vis-a-vis the threats from the United States. I sort of had the sense during the speech, and maybe all of it that surrounded it, that it ended up being less about a direct message, for example, to the U.S. president than a message to Canadians. Yeah,
I probably both at the same time, but for Canadians, for sure. And when you look at it really today, the medium was the message. It really was a way to implicitly, indirectly, however you want to say it, give the message that we are strong and free. And at times, maybe a little bit more direct than others with using that line, for example. But I think I agree with all the comments from my colleagues, and I think it was a very smart move to have him come, and the message that it sent was strong. I think the fact that we had so many people come out, I was a bit surprised by that, if I'm to be honest, if we're sort of sharing. I was shocked, actually, in the sense that some want to see the king, for sure, but you only had very limited moments to do that. And it really felt like people came out to support that implicit message, right? That message that we are indeed strong and free. And to James and Rob's point about the idea that we see former prime ministers of different parties mingling, the fact that we saw others, important leaders from other institutions. There's no better way, as Tom was pointing out, to sort of demonstrate your sovereignty, demonstrate who you are, than to hold dear your institutions that make your country work. So I think it was a phenomenal day for Canada, and I think it was very smart of the Carney government to allow this to happen. And frankly, I think the real best part about all of it was seeing so many Canadians come out to support that message. I thought that was pretty powerful and even at times emotional for us all.
The throne speech and the substance of that we're going to get into in a second, James. Like the domestic part of all of this was a big part of the speech, but there were parts that the king kind of inflected his own wording into, or his own reflections into. And in particular, they were around whether we are indeed, as he said, the true north, strong and free, or around our unique national identity, some reflections on his mom. Did you think that those statements struck the right balance in addressing kind of the bigger story of what's happening with the United States and kind of the reason that this even came to be, while at the same time, like, I imagine the goal was not to further antagonize Donald Trump.
The subtlety of the language and the subtlety of the inflection in the imposition of the language it's a very delicate thing, right? And so it's not just the choosing of the words, but it's how it's delivered and all that. And I think they actually did a pretty masterful job, because you can imagine if there was a little too much heat, a little too much, aggression, and they crossed a line. I think they came right up to the line, stood at it, and then backed away where it was appropriate. Because you can imagine if there was a little too much heat, right now you might have Ambassador Hillman or a minister of the government on Fox News debating Tucker Carlson or someone who's saying, oh yeah, if you're an independent country, then why did you need King Charles here to do that? So it was very well done. very, very well done. And I think what needed to be said was said. People who are sophisticated enough to know what wasn't said understand why what wasn't said. And I think there was a firm moment of solidarity across this country in French and in English, whether you're on the Conservative, Liberal, New Democrat, Green, doesn't matter team. This is a moment for Canada, for solidarity, and for expectation of unity. And I think that they did a masterful job of saying the right thing in the right tone in the right way. And there were a lot of ways that it could have been done wrong, and all of those ways were avoided.
Yeah, it's not hard to picture a scenario, Tom, in which Donald Trump is further antagonized and goes off. We've seen it actually happen in the Canada-U.S. relationship in recent months on a number of different occasions. The context has shifted a little bit, though, because there have been much, far fewer references to us as the 51st state, let's say, since that meeting in the Oval Office. There's been none compared to 6 weeks ago or 8 weeks ago. How do you think that informed ultimately the final product?
Or to Governor Carney, I like the way James put that. I think that if we looked like we needed our big brother fighting our fights for us in the schoolyard, it wouldn't have been good for us either. But it was just enough of a reference to Canada's sovereignty, to its independence. And to pick up on the words English and French, I have to tell you, I just did an hour French TV panel show. And the clips that we were able to use from King Charles III in French were impeccable, easily understood by anybody in the French-speaking world, and that was an added bonus.
Okay, I'm going to take a quick commercial break. As promised, we've got a lot to discuss when it comes to the substance of this throne speech, which is meant to set out the government's agenda. We're going to talk about that agenda and opposition reaction to it with our front bench in just a moment. Stay right there.
Canada can build new alliances and a new economy that serves all Canadians. The Prime Minister and the President of the United States, for example, have begun defining a new economic and security relationship between Canada and the United States, rooted in mutual respect and founded on common interests to deliver transformational benefits for both sovereign nations.
After months of evolving threats from U.S. President Donald Trump, the King's speech today was hotly anticipated as a key diplomatic moment for Canada, but it is also the government's blueprint for the parliamentary session ahead. The speech reiterated in that vein key campaign promises like a tax cut, building new relationships with the U.S. and the rest of the world, joining Rearm Europe, accelerating infrastructure projects, and tabling legislation to eliminate federal interprovincial trade barriers by Canada Day. Here's how Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre responded.
No specific plans to get anything done, even though, as the Prime Minister has said, we are in a crisis to break our dependence on the American economy. So we're here to turn the government's talking points into real plans. We pledge to work with the government to repeal the anti-energy law, C-69, repeal the energy cap, the electric vehicle mandate, the offshore shipping ban. Let's get our pipelines building. Let's get our goods to markets other than the United States.
Let's bring back our front bench on what you just heard. Brian Gallant, James Moore, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benziar here. Rob, I'll start with you. If there's a nexus to the back and forth at this point in time, just a few days into this session, between the opposition and the government, it is that the government is talking about expectations and sort of broad strokes of what it intends to accomplish, much like we heard during the campaign. And the Conservatives are saying, like, you need to put more details to this. We need a more specific plan. What do you think of that back and forth?
I mean, I understand that narrative if I'm the Tories. I mean, they are still licking their wounds. It was a very disappointing campaign. Remember, on New Year's Day, Vashi, they had a 25 percentage point lead and looked like they were going to win 200 seats. It's another minority Liberal government and a strengthened minority Liberal government, and one that, frankly, with 169 seats could be pretty durable, could be around for 3 or 4 years. And that can't be easy if you're Mr. Poilievre. Now, throne speeches are always 40,000 feet. They're broad strokes. I mean, I wasn't really looking for detailed legislation. I mean, there were actually some of the you and I were talking this earlier, Vashi. Some of the details in the speech when the Prime Minister was talking about the GST rebates on houses and things like that. It sounded it almost sounded too down in the weeds compared to the lofty rhetoric of the rest of the speech. Although he looked very chuffed that you're going to save $850 on a house average household with that tax cut. But I think I understand where the Conservatives are coming from. That they can really only criticize. They are the opposition, and unfortunately for them, they weren't planning to be the opposition, and I think they're still struggling to figure out how they're going to oppose, especially since it seems to me that Mr. Carney is going to be doing a lot of things that Conservatives have been talking about for many years. I was speaking to the Conservatives at Queen's Park today about this, and they were quite encouraged with what they heard in the throne speech about one economy, not 13, getting rid of interprovincial trade barriers, talking more about maybe not spelling out Bill C-69, but in your interview, Vashi, with the Prime Minister, he indicated that was not written in stone. And I think they were encouraged by what they heard when he told you that down here at Queen's Park. So I think there is some optimism for small C Conservatives in that speech. Whether it's for the big C Conservatives on Parliament Hill, I don't know.
The speech is definitely, I don't think, intended to be, overly detail-oriented, Brian. At the same time, it is starting to feel like there's a lot of huge promises that the government is making. Like, the expectation setting is through the roof. They're going to, and we heard it multiple times today, as we did over the past few weeks. We're going to transform the economy, make it the strongest in the G7. Like, we are not, by any objective measure, close to the strongest at this point around GDP growth or GDP per capita in the G7. Like, that's a big promise to make. What are your thoughts on that kind of expectation setting through the speech today and how you anticipate the opposition will position itself?
Let me start off by just saying that a speech from the throne right after a campaign is, I think, different than the others in the sense that you have a party that developed a platform, usually pretty specific, to be fair, compared to maybe a party trying to decide what it's going to do midstream of their mandate. And they come in, they discuss it, it's debated for weeks at a time, and then they win, and they're now very focused on implementing that platform. So it actually, substantively speaking, becomes a speech from the throne that's a bit boring because we've heard all this. I mean, I don't think there was anything that was a surprise.
Yeah.
The only thing you do get, though, in that first speech from the throne, I think, is two things. One is you will get a set of priorities of which elements of the platform they're going to do first. You may get a few more details, to Rob's point. But then the second thing is you get the tone. And again, not to belabor our first segment, but I think the tone was certainly, again, the medium being the message. So enough of that. Yeah. On the next sort of steps and what it means for the opposition, look, the opposition, as Rob says, has to oppose. It is sort of it would be weird for them to be like, we think these are great ideas. They just went through a campaign that they obviously were against all of this. So really, the speech from the throne, the first one for a government, finds itself just everybody staying on the same battle lines, if you will, politically speaking. I do think, though, you're absolutely right that expectations are high, but that was created during the campaign. I think the speech from the throne isn't going to mitigate that or enhance that. I think the campaign certainly set the expectations. And look, the Carney government may feel like they can hit those expectations from somebody who's been in government. Certainly, you'd rather underpromise and overdeliver. But if they're able to deliver on this stuff, it would indeed be transformational. So the tone hasn't changed. And the way in which they want people to see them acting as a government hasn't changed either.
The election was not that long ago, James, but when Brian, for example, references delivering on the expectations that they have set, like how, I'm not looking for a specific number of months, but give me a sense, if you could, of how long you think they have before there needs to be some tangible results to share with Canadians.
Well, I think that the timing is actually a little bit tough, right? Because Parliament will sit until the end of June, and then it'll break for the summer break and all that. And you've got the G7, you've got the First Ministers meeting next week. So there's a lot of stuff that's going to occupy the calendar. Plus, I gather there are some conversations with the White House about having some kind of either binding process or some kind of an interim agreement ahead of the G7 meeting that they can put in the window as progress that maybe either the White House wants to put as a benchmark for other trade agreements or alignments going forward. So there's a lot of stuff to do, but it will be curious to see what the government puts forward as bills C2, C3, C4 to actually have a legislative agenda here. And, today's throne speech, as Brian pointed out, it's typical of governments to, lower expectations, over-deliver, lower expectations, over-deliver. It's a fantastic rule for life, and it's a great rule for governments. But the Prime Minister is going in the opposite direction. And this builds on what happened last week, right? Like Stephen Harper never said we are going to make Canada an energy superpower. We said we would like for Canada, we think Canada can be. We're going to push towards, we're going to have one project, one review. We're going to get towards a yes mandate. We're going to try to make all these things happen and align things and have Indigenous reconciliation. No, they Minister Hodgson, the Prime Minister of Canada, they said Canada is going to be an energy superpower. We are going to remove internal barriers to trade that the federal government can control. Okay, that's good. Great. Let's get after it. And I think it's a lot harder to land a plane than it is to take one off. And so we'll see what the actual process is in the coming weeks and months to actually deliver on these promises. And I hope they haven't set themselves up for a disappointment, because the country has high expectations for this government.
I think it is a distinct choice, though, as James lays out, Tom, right? To use the language, to employ the language that they are, to say we are going to, Canada will be, versus we're going to aim for X, Y, and Z. What do you think is informing it? Is it, as Brian mentions, the idea that, Mark Carney hasn't been in politics, so he thinks it's going to be different with him, or is it something else?
Mark Carney has been in government. He's never been in power. But what he knows is the art of the civil service. The civil servants have their own cadence. I am telling you right now that there are not a lot of deputy ministers who are going to be taking 3 or 4 weeks on the dock at the cottage. That order that he gave to start reducing down from the 9% growth per year that we had during the Trudeau years. By the way, that was a strong criticism of the incompetence of the Trudeau years, talking about that 9% a year growth outside of the pandemic. So he was saying that's over. That will become 2%. I mean, he's saying in terms of the glacial pace of the civil service, that's overnight what he's ordering. And he's not afraid to set the bar high, because he's setting it high for his cabinet. He's setting it high for his senior civil service, and he's setting it high for himself, and he knows that. But he doesn't want to get caught in the trap of lower expectations and letting the civil servants think that they can just twiddle their thumbs and get away with this. He's going to be reducing the size of government. And he knows that it's the only way that he can create the wealth that will allow him to accomplish the big projects that he wants to make Canada richer and more productive long term. So it's a really gutsy move by someone, but he's not new to the game, even though he's playing it in a different way and on a different level than he did before. Look, telling the senior civil service that they will deliver on this is a way of making it happen. The other trick is to tie their bonuses to their performance of lowering, reducing expenses without affecting services to the public. And that, by the way, can be done. It's been proven time and again if you have people who have made that decision in terms of public administration. So gutsy move by Carney. Of course, he's going to be held to it. It'll be thrown back at him until it gets done. But you know what? I think that he's got Canadians cheering for him from coast to coast, no matter who they voted for in the last election.
The only caveat, and Rob, I'll give you the last word, and not to be a negative Nelly, is I'm old enough to remember when the last government promised to also, reduce their government spending through attrition, for example, to cut outsourcing. And instead it went up year over year. They have clearly outlined the objective. Tom is absolutely right. But there's still no details about how they're going to go from 9 to 2%. And it's been very hard for any other government, even those who maybe more fervently desired to do so, to be able to do it.
Yeah, it's not going to be easy. I mean, but Mr. Carney has been thinking about being prime minister for a very long time. I was speaking to a friend of mine who was talking to him in 2009, and he was wondering if, being the Bank of Canada governor would affect his future political life if he had one. So he's had a lot of time to think about this. So presumably he has a plan that he will at some point share with all of us on how to cut the the size and scope of government. He's an Ottawa area MP. He's going to have to talk to his constituents about why government needs to be leaner and meaner. And that's not going to be easy for him. Ask Pierre Poilievre, who doesn't have a seat, thanks in part to a lot of fear-mongering, I think, that folks had about what the Conservatives would do to the size and scope of government. But I think Tom is bang on in the sense that he understands the cadence of the senior civil servants, the deputy ministers, who are going to have to set the tone. And I don't think he's going to be captive of them the way, I don't think Prime Minister Stephen Harper was captive of them. I think Mr. Harper was pretty artful in the way that he dealt with the senior civil service, especially when he had a majority. But I think it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. It's not going to be easy, but I think Mr. Carney looks like he is stoked about having this challenge. I mean, he certainly has a spring in his step. He may not have a chief of staff full time, but he certainly seems to have a pretty good idea of what he wants to accomplish as Prime Minister.
I'm going to leave it on that note. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate the discussion tonight. Our front bench, Brian Gallant, James Moore, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie. We're going to take a commercial break here on Power Play. On the other end of that break, we've got a really special interview with Cadet Olivia Vernelli. She served as the Queen's wreath bearer right there here in Ottawa during the ceremony that took place earlier today. We're going to speak with her next. Welcome back to Power Play. King Charles and Queen Camilla concluded their whirlwind 24-hour visit to Canada by laying a wreath at the National War Memorial's Tomb of the Unknown Soldier this afternoon to honor Canadian soldiers who have made the ultimate sacrifice in the name of our country. The woman you are about to see holding flowers next to Queen Camilla is 16-year-old Silver Cross Cadet Warrant Officer Olivia Vernelli. She was invited to be Her Majesty's flower bearer and escort, and she delivered the official salute. Olivia was just 6 months old when her father, Master Corporal Scott Vernelli, died during his third combat tour in Afghanistan back in 2009. She now serves in her father's former unit. I spoke with her following the ceremony. Hi, Cadet Warren. It's such a pleasure to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I can't believe I'm here today.
Oh, well, I have to say, I watched every minute of you with the wreath, and you did a fantastic job. What was it like to be part of the ceremony?
To be honest, it was such an honor to be here to represent my Cadet Corps back at home at Petawawa, the 2642 Royal Canadian Army Cadet Corps, and to be here to represent the Silver Cross families and their loved ones who sacrificed their life for Canada's freedom.
In your case, it was your father who
Yes.
paid the ultimate sacrifice for our country and for our freedom. What did today mean when you think about his sacrifice?
Meant a lot. I was only 6 months old when he passed, and I know he's always looking down on me, and he'd be super proud of me, and he'd always be checking my uniform, making sure my boots are signed, making sure my beret looks good. Especially, he wore the same cap badge as me in the military, so he'd make sure that my cap badge would be shined well and my medals would look good.
How much of you being a cadet is because of his, time spent and service to this country in the military?
Growing up on military bases like Petawawa, Gagetown, Borden, I always saw cadets marching around, and I knew when I was 12 years old I wanted to join. And when we moved back to Petawawa, I learned that they had the Royal Canadian Regiment Cadet Corps. So I was like, oh my gosh, this is an amazing opportunity. This will be my way to connect with my father, and every time I walk into the building I see pictures of him, and my cadet instructors tell me stories about him, and just putting on this uniform makes me feel like there's always a part of him with me. And I'm just so amazed to always wear the same cap badge, and I was so amazed to wear the rank that he had, which was Master Corporal, and now I'm a warrant, so I kind of brag a little bit, but he'd be very proud of me. And yeah.
What does it say to you that the King and Queen used what little time they had here, like a 24-hour period, one of the main things they did was go pay respect to people like your dad.
Yeah. I just hope they go back to England remembering the Silver Cross families and keep that light shining on them. There's not many opportunities that Silver Cross families get that moment to shine. And yeah, I hope they go back remembering those families and remember those who are fallen.
Just one final question for you. When you saw all, I mean, this area was packed to the brim. Like there were Canadians lined up with flags, all waiting for the moment that you were such a significant part of. How did it make you feel?
It made me feel so privileged that I was chosen to have this role. And I saw everyone's faces and so excited to meet their majesties and our Prime Minister. And
a moment to remember?
Yeah, just a moment to remember our military families and our soldiers and those who are fallen.
Well, thank you for your service. Thank you to your father for his service, paying the ultimate sacrifice for all of us. And thank you for the excellent job that you did today. It's such a pleasure to meet you. Thanks.
Such a pleasure to meet you as well.
And speaking of remembering, Olivia also showed us this stuffed bear. You can see her holding it right there. She and her mom brought with her to today's ceremony. The bear was Olivia's when she was just born. Her dad left for his tour when she was 12 days old. He took the bear with him. You can see him pictured there with it. When he died, the Canadian military was able to recover that bear and send it back to Olivia and her mom. The red sash on it is meant to mirror the one that Olivia wears as a cadet. A piece of her dad with her all the time, including with the King and Queen today. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Power Play. We've got some breaking news, initial reaction from Donald Trump in some capacity to the events of today. Of course, a big theme of the throne speech and the fact that the king came to deliver it was all around Canadian sovereignty against the backdrop of threats to that sovereignty emanating from Donald Trump. He has now posted this on his social media channel, Truth Social. I told Canada, which very much wants to be part of our fabulous Golden Dome system, that it will cost $61 billion if they remain a separate but unequal nation, but will cost $0 if they become our cherished 51st state. They are considering the offer. So the Golden Dome, just to refresh your memory, is kind of a missile defense system that the Trump administration plans to usher in with a price tag, they say, of $175 billion. We didn't know at what cost Canada's participation would come. Donald Trump now says it's $61 billion. More significantly, perhaps, though, he references us once again as a potential 51st state of the United States, something he has not done since that Oval Office meeting with Prime Minister Mark Carney a number of weeks ago. I will leave Power Play there. Lots more reaction to that coming up tonight on CTV News Channel. I'm Vashi Kapelos. Thanks for watching.